about this more stable and familiar technology. The second is that this is all about the post-pandemic world, in which we don't plan, I hope, to go back to being completely online. So this is actually a separation on two counts, kind of a separation from before and a separation from during the pandemic, adapting and maximising benefits from where we originally were and where we found ourselves for a while. So here we are now. Having said that, I think it's all too easy to say that so much has changed over the last 2 years and 4 months. Not that I'm counting. We know, of course, that we have to be very nuanced when understanding the deep characteristics of change and what that actually means in terms of social life and in terms of making meaning or meaning making. But I also think we all recognise that there was a before, and now there is something that we are possibly consciously labelling an after. So when it comes to technological innovations or new ways of doing things, we've already seen over the last decade or so the way that smartphones and mobile technology have altered ways of working in newsrooms, changing news gathering, live broadcasting and content distribution. We know as journalism educators and researchers and practitioners that the production processes change constantly and that you really do fall behind at your peril. But there are nonetheless many questions, I think, about what this all means. So what about where production meets content? Has content also changed? And do we now demand or expect more as news consumers or news citizens? How much do we actually really rely on accurate, truthful news to try and make sense of the world that we live in and to make decisions about our lives? Those are perennial questions we've always asked ourselves, but they're still as valid today as they were before. Or is it the case then that in so many respects that life is pretty similar to before, but we have to, use perhaps a different lens to understand the after? So during the pandemic, it goes without saying, there were so many challenges for all of us, but for journalists who had to work constantly within changing restrictions, as well as things like downsizing in newsrooms and all sorts of pressures on their practices. And yet they delivered us the news. They still had to provide us with the news. We saw many innovative storytelling approaches emerging, and of course further development of data-driven storytelling. And we can probably say now, I might be wrong, but I think this is the case, that journalists now have even sharper social media and digital skills, even though those journalistic techniques were gaining much momentum before the pandemic. They were accelerated, and multi-skilling increased, and skills increased. And I think as a society, we're better off for that. As always, though, the pressure for innovation brings associated risks, not only of burnout for individual journalists, but also the risks to accuracy, the decline of traditional journalistic values and balanced news gathering processes. That 24/7 news machine is driven by the need to be engaging audiences on social media and to deliver live streaming. And it can all too easily create massive pressure on traditional newsroom identities and on those journalists who have had to upskill to keep up with dynamic content creators, as well as with social media audiences who have also become more creative and involved during the pandemic. But the pandemic also meant that mainstream, reliable and accurate journalism was absolutely vital. We really, really needed it. As anxious audiences relied on the news to tell them what was happening, and communal anxiety and feelings of risk acted as a kind of social glue. Well, at least in the early days of the pandemic, when we were all trying to figure out what on earth was going on. So given all those forces and dynamics, and I know I will have missed many, it's very timely, I think, to ask, what next? And what does all of this mean for the continued development of digital journalism, as you will be doing today? It's a really good question. As you have outlined in your excellent paper abstracts, the COVID-19 pandemic clearly gave a strong boost to data journalism, but it was, after all, perhaps the perfect data-driven story. Large amounts of data were being collected by numerous sources, including news organisations, NGOs, universities, as well as some conflicting scientific data from health services and government agencies and so on. And it was #1 headline story for months because the audience had such strong personal reasons to be engaged with it. But now that story has moved from its #1 slot, and thank goodness for that actually, to be replaced by other serious and significant global and national events, and even some trivia. There is even a bit of a light side emerging in some news stories. Not all of those stories, of course, lend themselves to data-driven storytelling, presumably. I'm not an expert, so I'm just asking that question. So I think it's timely to explore in what ways will data journalism remain a key tool in content curation. Will it continue to affect production processes? Might it even change news gathering choices? So the indication from what I can see is that yes, it's here to stay. Sky News has developed a system to automate part of the work, making the work of data journalists more efficient and faster, with the goal being higher quality content for its audiences. Its content is certainly very professional and really engaging, and it's happening across the board in different places. And personally, I really like it. And as a news consumer or a citizen who consumes news, it's certainly really, really helpful. But I think there's also certainly great understanding amongst news providers and calls from the public that scientific data and other data have to be unpacked and differences in data clearly indicated. It is also the case that accurate data can be very difficult to come by. And I think we should remember that in different parts of the world, journalists and other data providers, as well as whistleblowers, can put themselves at enormous risk if they contradict official statistics. This isn't new. It was always the case that those journalists who interrogate information, or lack of information, provided by power holders may do so at great personal risk. In theory, at least, data visualization based on accurate data is hugely informative to the public and often much needed, but in practice may be really, really hard won, and even dangerous for those who try to investigate, claim and counterclaim. So post-pandemic then, I think it's important to know how audiences also respond to data journalism, and for journalists continuing to use data journalism, it might be a bit more challenging, I don't know, to continually identify which stories are newsworthy enough to warrant investment in data visualization. So what makes news newsworthy has long been a topic of interest for researchers. So now I guess we are expanding into the question of what makes newsworthy of visualization and how extensive can, or perhaps even more importantly in terms of ethical considerations, should that visualization be? Or is it the other way around? If something is actually worth visualizing, then does that mean by default it becomes newsworthy? Just as pictures and film are key components of the news, arresting images or even one image can be iconic and tell a story that stays in our collective memory, sometimes for generations. Is that what is going to be for data journalism? Throw into the mix the question of what the nature of the audience is, active users or reactive consumers, and you're facing some very complex decision making. Also, is it the case that teamwork is more productive, or is the task of data visualization increasingly going to fall into the hands of innovative young content creators? And what balance is to be struck between going out for the story or gathering it online from online sources? In addition, there's the question of what is data visualization for? Is it there to entertain, to inform, or even to empower publics? If it's about informing and empowering, then the data sources need to be transparent, sources shared, potentially. And that raises some questions. And what happens if the data is inaccurate? If it paints a distorted picture, how will it be corrected? Will it be at speed with due prominence? And what about public trust if this doesn't happen sufficiently well? I know I can't in any way have done justice to the richness and complexity of your own work and professional expertise that's in the room at the moment, so do forgive me for that. But I do have to thank you all for it, because just thinking about the subject of this conference and its timeliness made it a fascinating task for me. So apologies for any sweeping generalisations that I might have made in my enthusiasm for the conference, but it really did lead me to ask a lot of different questions, as you've obviously heard. So I'm not a data journalism specialist, but questions about the nature and value of news and news journalism are of great interest to me in my own research. From my perspective, the civil power of the news to tell us about and influence matters of our identity the legitimacy we accord our institutions that govern us, and our understanding of the risks we face really do resonate, particularly where news journalism can, through clear, compelling, accurate and accessible data visualizations, challenge official power holders, holding them to account, as well as identifying correct, dangerous and damaging false news and information which now circulates so widely. So I'm sure what will follow will be excellent presentations by and that will be followed by fascinating discussions. And so it's just left for me to congratulate Jingrong for organising this event and to wish you all a really interesting and very productive day. So thank you.
Thank you.